Hello, Layman Pascal, one of the most fascinating, interesting, out of this box, out of this world polymaths that we've ever had the privilege of having on this little blue rock hurtling through space-time. It is a great gift to many people that you're here. Thank you for being here to discuss whatever the heck we decide to discuss in the next hour and a half.
I'm always happy to be with you, although I'm always skeptical about introductions.
Oh, good, me too. And not just skeptical, but dreadful of them in many cases, but that's okay. Now, you look great.
I don't know if you know Slavoj Žižek, the Slovenian philosopher. He sometimes brings up this thing about introductions that's based on Lacanian psychoanalysis, where like what they mean by castration is when you run into this thwart that exists between your lived embodiment and your like social representation. So when people introduce him and he has to listen to what they're saying about him, and then that's in contrast to who he is, he then thanks them for castrating him. So thank you for castrating me, Justin.
You're welcome. I hope it wasn't, I hope it was just terribly in conflict with everything that you're about. So that you can...
But I'm gonna lean into it.
Okay, good. All right. Well, okay, good. So there's a million things I would love to chat with you about. And so, as you know, well, first of all, you look nice today, Layman. Tell us about this. Tell us about this outfit that you've got on.
Well, this part here was from my course. Well, this I've been wearing for like a day. It's just very comfortable. It's from the company that my wife runs, El Faro, and this necklace is hers. And then I put the hat on to do my teaching this morning with Parallax Academy because I got to represent like Canadian hillbilliness a little bit. And then it was chilly earlier, and I put this on, and I just love the combination.
Okay, I love it. Okay,
my Easter look.
It's very festive. It's very festive. All right. Okay, good. So we have 27 topics we can talk about today, and anything else that you'd like to throw in the mix. So do you want to pick one to start with, or shall we can also allow the magic hat to pick one for us? You just let us know. Let me know.
I'm all in on the magic hat.
All right. Okay, here we go. Oh, two fell out. Does that mean we have to talk about both at the same time?
Okay.
Okay, the first one that I saw was other dimensions.
Okay.
Okay, and then do you want me to tell you the other one?
Yeah, what's the other one?
The meaning crisis.
The meaning crisis and other dimensions. It's not obvious how they splice together, but we might find a way.
All right.
I'm just going to riff on these prompts, or do you have anything specific in mind? Okay.
Yep. The success of this is all entirely in your hands, so good luck.
Well, I'll tell you the thing I don't like about other dimensions, and then I'll tell you the thing I do like about other dimensions.
All right.
What I don't like is this impression you get from a superficial reading of physics that you can actually think about these other dimensions. And you're like, oh, well, 12-dimensional universe, 15-dimensional universe, or even 4 or 5 dimensions. It starts to fall outside of what we mean by the dimensions of this universe. Now, I don't dispute that they're useful in terms of combining these variables to produce different kinds of mathematical and computational maps. But it leads to this effect that we saw all through the 20th century of people just going, well, maybe it's happening in another dimension, right? As if there's just this huge nebulous other space that we can somehow allow into our thinking, right? And it's beautiful to challenge yourself to open your mind like that. But as soon as you start including in your own thought map things that by your own definition can't be included in your thought map, then you're running the risk of smuggling nihilism into your cognition. That's worrying.
Well, that's a much more interesting form of performative contradiction, isn't it?
Yeah, and it is very interesting. It's very subtle, and I think it can be degenerative over time. I think the excitingness of opening to other dimensions gives way to just allowing us to pretend we're thinking of things that we ourselves can't think of, and maybe even patting ourselves on the back for that. On the other hand, in the shamanic sense of other dimensions, I'm very excited. I think state change and Bardo realms, that kind of experiential encounter with the liminal spaces of the world That's absolutely essential, and it can't be essential anymore just for saints and mystics and wizards and weirdos. I think it's got to be really a widespread part of the general culture if we are to collectively put everything on the table to start to face these accumulating challenges that we're clearly not able to solve with our adult, sober, bureaucratic, strategic intelligence systems.
Wow, that's a really good. I feel like you've just nudged us in the direction of the meaning crisis there. I don't know if that was intentional. Nice work.
Yeah, I get there were some off ramps there for sure. Okay, so like think of the meaning crisis as
oh shoot, I didn't mean to do that. I want to talk about other dimensions for a second.
Okay, go. You're the host.
All right. Okay, so what okay, so if that's important, if it's important to include that and to have not just weirdos and saints and mystics experience and come into contact with these bardo realms, these other worldly liminal spaces, why is that important? Why would that matter?
In a couple of different ways. The first one that leaps out to me is all of our systems, meaning our socio-technological systems, our symbolic systems, our computational models, our mathematical models, they empower us to solve problems by making more faithful representations of reality. Now, the scientific revolution is one instance of an increase in our ability to make more faithful representations of reality. It powered this huge transformation of the world. But that transformation, we can't just take for granted. We have to keep adding in more reality into our systems and maps, or we're going to run into, as we have been, a certain kind of ceiling on the amount of progress and change we're capable of making. So all over the world, we see the types of changes that we've been able to figure out how to make over the last 100 or 200 years. Absolutely incredible, but they seem to be stuck. They seem to be entrenched. It seems like their incentive structure is undermining their integrity. It seems like even though they nominally recognize they can't adaptively respond to the accumulating results of their own successes, there's all these factors we don't seem to be able to fold in. There's a huge amount of reality that human beings are experiencing that are not being incorporated into these systems. And so the gap, the discrepancy between what the system can recognize and what's actually going on in the world creates a disconnect, which causes the systems to be insufficient to what the world is. And that's fine for a while, but it's going to catch up with you. So one way or another, we have to enfold much more reality into these maps. And that can mean a lot of different things. It can mean folding in quantum ambiguities. Right? It can mean folding in externalities that aren't priced into the market, but it also means folding in the different experiential states for human beings. If you try to run a mathematics and an economy based on just one frame of mind for one type of being during part of its life in one of its chemical states, that's a really small slice of reality. Right? And the accumulating limitation of the narrowness of that slice, it's going to catch up with you and bite you in the ass sooner or later.
Great. Anything else to say about that?
No, I feel fine about that.
Oh, here you go. All right. Transformation, Layman. What do you got to say about that?
What do you even mean by transformation? What were you thinking when you put it on the list?
That's my exact question. What do you mean by transformation?
You're asking me. All right.
No, well, I can.
Please do, because it's one of those things like, you mean changes in general, or you mean something more specific?
Yeah, well, I think what I'm thinking about when I think about transformation is some kind of qualitative shift, like a reconfiguring of the deeper structures of either consciousness or society or one's life, I guess we could say, that lead to not just some sort of like quantitative shift, some sort of like better than what was there in the past or something like that, but like a complete or partial maybe, but in some way a what do you call it, like a new possibility space that emerges like that. So whatever was possible before the transformation, now there's something totally different on the table that we could see, imagine, go after, think of, or enact.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's, to me, I think of that as having three components, right? One is, what do you do to access that in yourself or collectively?
Yeah.
Two is, what do you find there in those spaces? And then three is, how do you assimilate or instantiate that stuff? So there's problems in all those areas. The first set of problems, where do you find new spaces, right? Are there uncolonized elements of the noosphere yet remaining for us to discover? Yeah, there probably are. And we're probably not going to find them with the same kind of thinking we've been using. We don't know exactly how to get there, but we do know that certain subsets of the species have been focused on this all along, right? Whether they're shamans or mystics or weirdos or people taking drugs or doing meditation or making, nonlinear resonant connections between weird mystical correspondences or art or surrealism, random cut-ups and things like that. There are a lot of ways in religion and art, but also in other areas of activity where people can try to break through into an open space. Then once you're in an open space, can you find anything there? Right. And sometimes it's obvious. You receive something like a revelation. You have a great insight. Oh, my God, that must be the structure of the DNA, something like that. But that may not immediately happen. It may be that people go to that space a lot and never find anything. And it may be that they have to morally task themselves with trying to bring something back, even if that's not natural for them to do. Right? If we're just sending people out to go fishing, and they're playing in the water instead of actually trying to bring something back for the village, that might end up being a problem for us. So maybe that we need an ethos that says when you go into your flow states, your expansive states, your novel states, your altered states, that you should be looking around to see if there's some interesting patterns that might prove useful. And then assuming that happens, then you got the problem that I think a lot of us face, which is where I think the transformation really shows up or doesn't show up, which is in your body, in your life, in your relationships, right? And this could be, I had an experience and saw the face of God. Now what? How do I live on that basis? Or it could be, I had a great insight into my personal life. Like I think every time I have a coffee, I put a little bit too much sweetener in. So I should always put in a little bit less than I think is the right amount. Boom, right? That's a new insight. I've got it. Sounds true. I can tell other people, great. But tomorrow when I go to have my coffee, am I going to do that? Right? So then there's this whole set of discipline-related practices. Maybe I have to write it down on a piece of paper and put it in my pocket. Maybe I have to put it in my shoe with a pebble so that I don't forget. I have to do something intentional to instantiate it like it's a discipline, because most of us have had insights or experiences in consciousness which are above the level of what we're able to act out in our daily lives. So we would love to have amazing new experiences. We would love to have amazing new ideas, but in reality, we're not even living up to the ones we've already had. Right? We should take that seriously. We should suffer that. We should let that be a task and a burden to us, and try to employ some basic behavioral tactics to see if we can actually instantiate these things. And then maybe we'll be ready for a bit more.
That's interesting. You hearkened me back to Sloterdijk and you must change your life, and anthropotechnics and all that. What are the actual technologies and practices that people can take on that may help transform them over a lifetime? Anything to say about that?
Well, first of all, I love a good Sloterdijk hearken. I mean, there's a whole dharma to all of that, right? And in some ways, that's what I would like my whole life to be about, is those sorts of things. So I think the simplest thing we could say about that is to remember that it's important and to set it as a priority, because the anthropotechnics, you don't know if somebody's going to, some master's going to tell you a method, you're going to read one in a book. Maybe the ancients have been practicing them and they worked, but maybe not. Maybe nobody's ever found the one yet that you need. Or maybe it's an organic adaptive process that's not the result of knowing the anthropotechnical discipline that will help you out, but is in fact just the result of you wanting to and keeping that in your mind and using feedback to judge whether it's working or not. Because most of what the rest of nature does is non-representational learning, right? There's a Nassim Taleb point. The jaguar wasn't explained. There were no diagrams or levels or grades of how to carry a dead gazelle up a tree. It got there just by trying to do it and suffering the feedback from the environment that caused it over time to streamline its performance in a very complex way. So I think the minimum thing we could do is set ourselves up for that kind of informative feedback by trying to.
That's very interesting. And, hearing the stories of some of the modern day mystics who've been, apparently maybe more successful in having some kind of transformation through their contact with these, different dimensions. I would say that resonates, because a lot of these people made their own way there through either some pretty traumatic, pretty difficult suffering that they had and their engagement with that, or just a powerful intention. Yeah.
I think so. I mean, there's different approaches for different people. I had a great teacher who used to talk about a dry path and a wet path.
Yeah.
Right? Some people need to upkeep the forms of the tradition, and it works for them to just have a rule and follow it.
Yeah.
But for a lot of other people, and under certain circumstances, that's no longer really possible, and you have to be more feral about it, right? Be more wild, be more adaptive. And I think there's always room for both, but I think the situation the world's in right now, and the fact that we can ask these questions and that these might be meaningful questions, means that a lot of people aren't sure how to go at it, right? And we're not sure whether the circumstances we're in are the same as the ones under which inherited simple disciplines might apply. So there's a lot of reasons to think we might need a more complex, more adaptive, natural approach that's based in intentionality and risk-taking and feedback, just because a lot of us can't be sure about anything we've heard anymore.
It's interesting. I went to a Joe Dispenza week in January. And he's one of those guys. I mean, I don't obviously know everything about his background, but from what he says and just listening to it, it just seems to me that he had a few resources, being a chiropractor, a few experiences, doing some yoga, something like that. And then he really found his own pathway there. Now, some of his meditations and stuff, they remind me a lot of Mahamudra. There's a focus on space. There's a focus on the vastness of space. There's sort of shifting one's basis of operation to something that's like timeless and boundless. So but it's whatever he's doing. It's like that, but it's not. It's Joe Dispenza's flavor. So it just makes me curious about how people might discover some of these things on their own, and whether that might be more, like what you said, maybe more relevant in today's world. It does bring up the question also, do these Bardo realms, do these liminal spaces, do these out of this world worlds, do they evolve too? Because if they do, I don't know where I'm going here. You talk now.
Well, I think there's always going to be a bit of a tension and a back and forth between these different approaches, right? Because you can make the strong argument of, well, ultimately we have to be able, for a changing world and for personal authenticity, you kind of have to regenerate the Dharma on a desert island by yourself to some degree. And then also do that in collaboration with other people who help bring forward a wisdom that's appropriate to the historical and technological niche that we're in. But that's a long, cumbersome, and fraught process.
Yes.
So if somebody's sitting on a whole bunch of inherited wisdom, they might look at that and say, sure, but you're only going to get 80% of it doing that way. You're probably always going to miss out on these few nuances that we have because we've been working on it for 10,000 years. You're like, okay, these are both good arguments. And it comes down in part to temperament and also to what the world situation is at the moment. Now, you said something about other states that interested me. What was that?
Do they evolve?
They evolve.
Do
Yes.
those other worlds evolve?
Okay, I would parse that out a little bit. And I would use a kind of neo-theosophical Ken Wilber kind of four states model. So if you take four sets of natural states, like gross realm states, subtle realm states, causal realm states, non-dual states.
Love it.
All right, gross realm is clearly evolving and changing. All our science tells us that everywhere we look. Subtle realm definitely could be as complex and as changing, maybe even more so than the gross realm. So qualitative, formal, affect-like, immaterial energies and entities and processes. We've been very simplistic about that historically, right? Mm-hmm. Do you have a soul or not? Right? Mm-hmm. Is there a heaven or not? There's no sense that you might have 30, or some people might have them and other people might not, or that it grows, or that heaven might be changing and evolving, that it might have tectonic plates that are shifting and changing. That when you go to Stonehenge, maybe the power isn't there anymore. Maybe it's 30 feet down the road after 1,000 years, right? I think we have to really take seriously the possibility that that poetic affective dimension of our experience is constantly evolving and changing. Now, when it gets to the causal, the self-causal, the tautological, the formal, the massless, immaterial, non-dimensional syntax of reality, kind of by definition, it's not changing. Right? Now, maybe it is, but it's the kind of change that for every intent and purpose we have to presuppose as eternal and unchanging. It's the bit of reality that we define as self-proving and non-changing. So it can't. And then non-duality, we'll just say, yeah, those categories both apply and don't apply simultaneously.
Well done. Well done. Okay. Next one.
Okay. This is fun.
I know. All right. Ambiguity. Oh, you said this was an urgent problem. I was curious. Why do you think that?
A couple of reasons. So, first one is the world is filling up with ambiguity. I think there's a Terence McKenna comment, right? The only thing on the market these days is ambiguity. However he would put it, right? Like if you look around, if you're like Trump, COVID, AI, Elon Musk, deep fakes, right? You're sitting there, how do you watch the news for 5 minutes without going, I don't know what the fuck's happening anymore, right? There's a sense of accumulating weirdness. We might assume that's just from the new information technologies. It's a result of the dislocated phenomenon that we now have access to being constantly juxtaposed with each other at all times. Or we could have a bigger picture saying, well, time itself is getting weirder. One way or another, everybody seems to be confessing a peculiarity and a strangeness and an uncertainty about the environment we live in now. So we've got it, that's urgent. We have to take that seriously. It's not just that there are accumulating objective crises we have to face. There's also an apocalyptic mood of the uncanny, of the uncertain, that some people are going to be better at surfing and other people are going to respond to, if they can't process ambiguity well, as a trauma that inclines them to shut down, to reactivity, to polarization, to conformity and gullibility, or weird and unnecessary rebellious freakouts. Those are all anticipatable results of people's inability to cope with increasing ambiguity in their sense of what the world is. And then something that's parallel to that is, how do you build meta perspectives? How do you build metacognitive skills, right? How do you build a kind of consciousness that can go beyond the different perspectives and values that we see in collision? Well, that's going to require the ability to lean into and be okay with cognitive dissonance. Although I want to call it socio-cognitive dissonance now, because there's some new studies on the way it relates to our cultural dimension. But by and large, a lot of us have difficulty in allowing our interior systems to fight with each other. Right? We have one value conflicting with another value. We either blank out or we double down on one. We don't want to handle that complexity. It's uncomfortable to be in difficult conversations. We're not sure what to do with all the options in the world. And part of that is our constitutional refusal to undergo the sensations that accompany the ambiguous friction between reality tunnels.
Mhm.
But if you wanted to get reality tunnels more harmonized and build a background space that could hold them, you've got to get better at withstanding the sensations between the conflicting versions of reality, which means you've got to get better at inhabiting ambiguity. And we need a lot more people to be able to do that well, and we need that fast. So that's another way in which ambiguity is urgent.
Mm. So when you say you want to build if you want to build a background space that can, I just want to, I want to make sure I understand this. I want to make sure I actually heard what you said. A background space that can hold all of the different reality tunnels. Is that what you said?
Yeah, that's part of what I said.
What does that mean? What does that mean?
Well, it's got a couple of aspects to it, right?
Yeah.
One is sort of philosophical and political. Let's say you wanted to make a transpartisan politics. You're going to be able to need to hold all these different very charged political viewpoints, which means you're going to have to actually suffer through their friction and not just think, well, here's a moderate centrist politics that balances them all out. No, you've got to really feel into them and really let them fight with each other in yourself to get to a rich version of how to handle that. Now, the other side of that looks like metacognition, right? Metacognitive, metasystemic skills are being pointed to by a lot of people in neuropsychiatry, cognitive science, things like that, as the kind of consciousness or intelligence that's trained up in the Dharma traditions. That's also necessary to allow people to adaptively modify themselves and sidestep basic problems of neurosis and depression and the meaning crisis, to not get locked into the trouble of a single identity. So this sort of background container, sometimes we think of it as an alchemical container because it might allow a refinement or a transformation inside itself. But you need something like that to have more than just a pluralistic war of all against all, right? It's fine if we're going to live in a world and we say, look, our people got together and we have this symbol set. We're going to make war on any other race or ethnicity or other symbol set. And you can go, well, we're going to have a modernity. And this is based just on where there's no real groups or traditions. We got atomized individuals. They're all going to try to be reasonable. They're going to work together. And somehow the outcome of that will be progress and general increase of prosperity. Great. But as soon as you run into, oh, we don't all agree on that shit, or we try to amplify this value through the system and it ends up sabotaging this value in the system, you run into a space where people start to become relativistic, pluralistic, right? We're totally aware there's so many differences. Even science seems to have evolved through these different paradigms. Now, what are you going to do? If that's reality, you're either stuck with that, a war of all the perspectives against each other, or you're trying to build some non-oppressive system that can handle as many of those as possible and get them working in a coordinated, more harmonious way. So then you need to kind of metaspace, a bigger picture. And to do that, you don't just need people saying that their mind can see that. You need people emotionally going through the friction between those so that they can substantially provide real space for all these different competing relative realities.
That's beautiful.
Am I talking too fast? I feel excited. Okay.
No, this is perfect. This is, yeah. I mean, I just wanted to pause there for a second because, I think that's what I'm committed to with my life, right? In some way. And I think that's what we're up to in the huddle, in this little experiment about, can we have conversations that demonstrate a more interesting way to work through different perspectives. But I like the injunction here that you actually can't sidestep the emotion. You actually have to go deep into it and feel it. That seems significant, and it's something I'm not sure we've yet achieved on the huddle.
Yeah, if you're in a relationship discussion, if you're in a relationship with somebody who you respect and you're in a mode where you're not going to totally freak out and they press you on something, right? It's not enough to go, okay, I think you might be right. You've got to really emotionally, even physiologically, allow for the fact that they might be correct about something you have a strong opinion about, and that thing might be you, right? And that's distressing. That's upsetting. And so we have to be able to at least broach that territory of experience in order to start to grow into that.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, we risk having a lifeless meta perspective that doesn't really transform ourselves or the world and is essentially fragile because we don't know how to undergo its rigors.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Okay, next one. War.
War. Don't want this to become about Ukraine. That's the obvious target. And it's upsetting what's happening to a lot of people there. Mm-hmm. I think we need to have more respect for aggression in order to understand better how to handle it. I think it's sometimes sad when people are against war because they're against making discriminations about how to have better conflicts. I would prefer the people who are anti-war protesters to be pro-better war protesters, because the anti-war protester takes themselves out of the running as an adjudicator of wars. There's always going to be conflict. We want the conflict to be settled faster and more multidimensionally, more gracefully, right? We would love when soldiers appear to be that sign that something good is happening rather than that something is terribly going wrong, right? There is potentially a way for these things to become much better. And if we're just against all of them, then we refuse to contribute our intelligence and our values to the project of making that better, right? And there is going to be a need, at least for the foreseeable future, for defense and protection and international intervention of various kinds. We're historically awful at that. We tend to use it for all the wrong things. We tend to cause more damage than we're trying to solve. We get into moral hysterias one way or the other. And in all of that, we're not necessarily getting better. I would just like it to be an improvement. And another aspect of that is, what wars are we fighting, right? We fought a war on drugs, hypothetically, an absolutely stupid concept that failed. But what about a war on pollution? Something like that, right? If we look at the amount of accumulating environmental instability, who's got the resources to deal with that? Who's got the international intervention and the technology and the money to start handling the ecological problem? I can't think of many institutions outside of the American Department of Defense that would even have a chance. And if that's what they were doing, if they were stabilizing infrastructure, cleaning up the oceans, cleaning up the air, doing these sorts of things, I would think, good, give them a huge chunk of the budget. I don't care if you raise their budget every year, as long as they're doing what we want them to do, that's really making a change in the world. So the problem is not necessarily that these forces exist and that they're constantly trying to get funding to keep themselves going in a way that skews all of our politics. The problem is we're not asking them to do the things that are actually going to keep us safe and secure our bodily well-being. If we could figure out a way to get them working on the projects we want them to be working on, then I would be much happier with their existence. Right now, I'm very unhappy with their existence. And I think there's also a part which is our, I don't know what we mean by that. You and me, the integral community, the meta thinkers, Canada, United States, whatever, something about that. We are going to face rivals and challenges, and they are going to be potentially brutal and potentially dangerous some of the time. So how do we handle that? But also, how do we anticipate that? If we don't understand aggression and aggressive responses, we're going to fail to properly respond to and negotiate with people who think about that a lot and feel a lot about that. There is a real problem, I think, in how aggression is being integrated or assimilated in our culture now. We seem to have a lot of people with useless aggressive freakouts and a lot of other people who pretend they have no aggression and only freak out against other people's aggression, right? And then I look and go, well, there's no training, right? Where are we getting any aggression training? In our schools, in our homes, in how to adequately embody that energy without making it be something perverse and destructive and traumatizing? We need to get way smarter about how we handle aggression and conflict.
That sounds like something we would all love to see in our new education systems that Layman is designing for us. All right, next one. Subtle energy in all its forms.
All its forms. That's a pretty big topic.
Well, because, you know, chakras, meridians,
sure,
kundalini,
There's a basic theoretical distinction to make in this territory that most people don't bother to make, because for most people, it's either something you can dismiss or something that all goes together in a vague box because it just works sometimes and we don't care about how to think about it. But in reality, I would say we need to be cautious. We need to be a theorist. A philosopher would be cautious about what's subtle and what's merely an invisible aspect of material reality.
Okay.
So if I'm talking about bioelectromagnetism as meridians or chakras or a form of treatment or a particular kind of energy, okay, that's normal, right? That's a piece of regular gross realm physics. Bioelectromagnetism basically is running off the 4 fundamental forces of physics. There's nothing particularly subtle about electricity. It just is a part of all the material structures of the reality in all of our bodies. Right? Our medical system tends not to acknowledge it properly, focuses on easier things to see, chemistry, surgery, the mechanism of the body. We really weirdly ignore electricity, but it's not subtle. It's not a whole other kind of ontology. It's the normal stuff of physical reality. So there's that. And we need to get way better at how we handle that. And we could be using electrical approaches for all kinds of aspects of our complex physiology. And we can get a lot better at having an electrical civilization. Now, what would really be subtle then, if we don't call that subtle, right? An energy that has no mass equivalence. Entities that are not material or embodied in any way, protean affective entities, Plato's realm of forms, moods as if they were things, realm of dreams, that kind of thing. So I think there's a fundamental distinction to start to try to make that almost nobody even begins to think.
Well, that's interesting, because I think in principle, mostly what I think of as subtle energies is the stuff that you would say is just on the, what would you call that? Just the fine end of gross?
Yeah. What bioelectromagnetism.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Interesting. And so you're thinking of subtle energies as like dreams that, so does the subtle then have no way of interacting with the gross?
That's an excellent question, right? And it's a matter for theorization and scientific experimentation. Some people have claimed it, right? Wilhelm Reich postulated a non-material life interactive energy, which he later said also had a negative version of itself. Some people have said these are points on a spectrum of massless energy, but he claimed he made a motor run on it, the orgone motor. Right? Not many people have tried to follow up on that experiment because it sounds crazy, right? But if you can find a device, if you can theorize the mechanisms of the flow of another postulated kind of energy, and then you could figure out how to translate it into regular electricity, then you might be able to run a motor with it, right? That's a possibility. So there's a whole realm of open thinking possibilities for scientists of tomorrow, because it's not terribly useful for individuals to postulate that there's no possible other kind of energy, or to say there just is, and I know what it is, and it's exactly what I think I read about in an ancient Chinese text. Right? We need to do real thinking and real experiments, just like we did for a very long time, to even start to figure out how electricity and magnetism work. How many smart people put their lives into trying to think out how to put numbers on that stuff and got almost nowhere, right? It took all of them over centuries to start to figure something out. So we need to start that project to see if there's anything there.
All right. All right. Well, let's see if we can carry the momentum from that conversation into this one. Oh, I don't know if I like this one. Technology.
Technology, you say?
Yes, not the other kind of knowledge.
It's very vague. It's very big. I mean, obviously, Heidegger had some famous attitudes about technology as an extension of a form of thinking that we might now call McGill-Christ's left brain style. I think there is some problems around the way we have thought about cutting the world up into instrumental mechanized systems. I think it's probably not as problematic as a lot of romantics have assumed it could be. There are huge possibilities for technology to become much more complex and organism-like, and to do a better job of reciprocally adapting to the kind of structures that would bring forth naturalness and satisfaction in a multidimensional way. Obviously, there's risks with some, and we probably need to do, at least this is what I like to do, is a more balanced parsing of what that is, right? Some technology is almost always bad. Some technology is neutral. AI, is it going to save us or doom us? I don't know. Could go either way. Water filters. Well, that sounds pretty good. We probably just need lots more of that, right? Smart energy grids, biospheres. Yeah, we probably just need more of those, right? So there's positive valence technologies that we should really double down on. There are neutral technologies that are a real gamble, and there's some technologies that are almost always problems. Right? An example of that would be, I mean, in the United States, there's a real tendency to use these machines that put holes in people, right? We have other tools for incapacitating people who are being problematic. There's lots of ways to stun people, to knock them out, but we tend to lean into this tool for putting holes in people. And if your frontline responders just have the tool putting in person machine, that's going to be problematic. It's very rare that you actually have to put a hole in a person. There's lots of other ways to solve that. So that's, on the whole, generally a negative technology. Right. So if we parse it out like that, we can begin to steer, but also it'll depend on what we're interested in. I don't think there's any particular limit on how multidimensional and life-friendly technology can become, but there's also a huge risk that the general thinking behind it and the incentive structure and the kind of people who are most tuned in to working on the, quasi-autistic production of technology may be steering that in the wrong direction. So if the people who are suspicious of technology were to open their hearts and lean into it and bring their input in more, we might get a much better class of technology going forward.
All right, next one. Okay. Egregores. And this is interesting because, I think it was Kenneth Burke that wrote about, we could think of technology itself as an agent, right? Like it's actually some kind of spirit that is inhabiting us and evolving itself through us. I don't know. It's an interesting way to think of it. But what do you know about egregores?
I think about it from two kinds of angles. One is like, can you generate a memeplex? And once you've generated it, does it have a life of its own?
Yes.
Does it become something like a god or a demon, or right? Can we get involved in our psychological and intersubjective and informational world in a way that looks more like Renaissance magic or something like that? And maybe that's a necessary thing for us to start to work on, because we all know now, you put something out into the information world, it's got a life of its own. So we keep seeing that. We keep getting bitten in the ass by things we didn't anticipate out there. So is there a way to become more responsible about that? About the ideas that are haunting the world, and the ideas that we create and then start to create us as if they were agencies. That's very interesting. And I think we do need to lean a little bit into the magical shamanic approach to start thinking about how we handle these things, because clearly moving patterns are gaining momentum and having effects which are sometimes good for people and sometimes devastating for people. And we've got to do that in a smarter way than just censoring what the government temporarily says is misinformation, right? We've got to become much more facile agents in that arena are needed. Now, on the other hand, there's this question, like, is technology itself an agent? I think it's important to experimentally expand the definition of intentionality to as many domains as we can to see if that provides us with new ways of thinking about those domains.
Mm-hmm.
Right? One of the classic divides between, let's say, left and right, between your stereotypical conservative and like a Marxist, is an appreciation of the idea that systems cause effects. There's a causality emerging out of the system itself. Now, if you make that argument to someone who doesn't see that, doesn't attribute that at all, then they're just very confused. Like, what do you mean? The system, there can't be a racist system. There's either racist people or not, right? If there's corruption, that's a few bad apples. It can't be that the very protocol or the very contract structure or the legislation itself acts like it has momentum. But the people who look systemically, they can see that it does, right? And you may not say it's the same kind of intentionality and causality that comes out of a human brain, or maybe you do say that. It doesn't have to be. But we need to look around and see whether or not there are causality-like effects emerging from things that look different than a self-enclosed flesh human being. And they could be historical momentums. They could be psychological things. They could be technological things. I think we're really blind in the Ken Wilber sense of, I got a subjective, objective, intersubjective, and systemic zone. I think it's the systemic zone we are least aware of because it's the hardest one to get observations of. We all have observations about our relationships, about objects, about what it's like to be ourselves. Who's ever been in the position to watch how a constitution plays out over time, or to change a protocol and watch it change and see what happens and what worked and what you didn't expect? Those are hard observations to get. So it's very difficult for us to build up an intuition about how those things work. And yet clearly those things are dominating the planet, right? The crises in ecology are not because of individuals refusing to cut down their carbon footprint. It's from huge international networks of things that move with a momentum that is almost unrelated to the interests of the individual consumer citizen. So we've got to take that seriously. We've got to start looking there and building up a wisdom about how to operate in that terrain. And part of that is acting like these things might be entities, right? That's a good short rule of thumb about how to start to get wiser about them.
All right. Brilliant. Here we go. Evil.
Evil. This very strange, tricky topic, because there's so much relativity to it. Classically, evil was anything that really, really upset us. The gods of other people, terrible natural disasters, the evils of the world. Now we've become enlightened in a certain sense, right? Yeah. So we've been critical of that attribution. And it's all too easy for people to lean into this dehumanizing sense that the other is a terrible thing that should be eliminated. So I want to bracket that and say, of course, that's a problem and we have to try to solve that.
Yeah.
However, there are certain ways in which the notion of evil might be acceptable to us. We might say that there are elements of human nature and reality that you can't get to with an accepting psychoanalytic framework, right? There are elements of human nature that are so terrible that the only real response to them is vigilance and preparation to fight them. We don't know exactly where that line is, right? You don't want to just put to death people for some kind of minor crime that it turns out they weren't guilty of. But when you see mass murder in a way where it's absolutely uncontested who was responsible, you start to wonder. You start to say, I don't care whether this was mental illness or intentionality. This was so awful to so many people. It just broke so many hearts and ruined so many lives that it's important for me to put a tag on that that says absolutely existentially unacceptable, worth doing anything to prevent, right? So that's one of the places evil comes in. Now, you can go a little bit farther than that if you wanted to say, does it have a life of its own, right? If we credit this idea that there's a subtle realm, an affective spectrum of beings and energies, they might not all be useful or helpful to organisms like ourselves, right? Some of them might be constituted such that the destruction of organisms such as ourselves is what they feed on or how they show up in the world.
Mm-hmm.
There might be malign entities which are malign by nature of the very frequency they operate at. If that's the case, and many people phenomenologically find that to be the case, then that's something we have to take seriously, keep an eye out for, and figure out some tactics for refusing, right? And we can attribute it like the egregores. We can attribute some kind of agency to that. Say, these are demonic. And we don't want to just use that as a pejorative label for things we don't like or things that make us anxious, but we don't want to let down our guard if phenomenon like that really exist in the world.
Mm-hmm. How would we actually know? If it's a subtle thing, how would we actually know that?
Exactly. So this requires a lot more theorizing. It requires people.
Same answer.
People who aren't just subtle wackos and mystics have to start taking this seriously.
Right.
You can experiment in your own life.
Yes.
That's not going to solve the general social knowledge conundrum in terms of these phenomena.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You might say, yeah, you got to change your thinking in various ways, right? And make sure you're not getting locked into some kind of pejorative mentality around these things. You got to look for where you think they might be showing up, right? If you're going to say to yourself, where would I look to see evil, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know. I might listen to the confessions of a serial killer. I might look at things that I think are absolutely horrible. I might look at, here's where it gets evolutionary, parts of my own life where I acted in ways that looked like all I was doing was attacking the things I valued the most.
Mm-hmm.
That's very strange, right?
Mm-hmm.
People who are addicts have this thing called the demon rum or whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. There is a sense in which some people do run into this. There's something going on in their system that seems as if it is agentically trying to undermine all of their achieved value experiences, to ruin their life, to ruin their emotions, to ruin their relationships, to ruin their health, to revert them back to some simpler, less valuable structure. Mm-hmm. Now, is that or is that not some kind of subtle thing coming in orthogonally from another dimension? Again, we'd have to drop a list of experiments to even begin, right? What would a wizard say about that? How could you deal with it if it was, and how could you deal with it if it wasn't? Mm-hmm. It's probably too big a topic to go into here, what we might start doing, but I don't think it's out of the question for smart, interested people to start proposing experiments that might be able to tell. And a lot of those experiments won't work. That's how science is. You don't always figure out what you're trying to figure out, but you start by hypothesizing something you can check on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, brilliant. That could be another day.
These are 27 different discussions.
Oh my goodness. All right. Okay, well, I got another one. Okay, spend as much time as you want on this. Prayer.
There's a silly element to prayer, for sure. And a profound element of prayer, right? This idea that that you can do magic, right? That you can ask the maximum demon to intercede on your behalf in the world by nothing but just remembering that it exists and asking it. Now that's pretty low level. There's also a sense in which people feel really psychophysically involved in certain kinds of deep yearning and petitioning experiences, where there's a modality that seems to draw on your whole being in connection with your whole understanding of the world. And sometimes that seems to be highly coordinated with coincidental outcomes, right? And that's a beautiful thing. That's a modality that we need to practice and get better at. And I think, interestingly enough, one of the places you practice that is with simple childhood seedings of it, right? Please and thank you. Taught to kids for generations, a little bit of pushback in the last generation or two against sort of social conformity training. But there's an element of that, of please, just remembering how to say please, feeling it, doing it with your whole body, that changes us. And whether it changes us in a way which accesses some ontological dynamics of the world, or whether it just is really good for our whole body to come together and almost painfully long for the right thing to happen relative to what we care about the most, both of those are really good, right? We should be exploring how it can have effects in the world, but at the zero level, it's just good for us to draw everything together and be absolutely petition-like before what's valuable and what we care about the most.
Yeah.
And it also helps us refine value, right? Like part of our ongoing evolution is, what do we care about, right? If you were to have a cultural tradition set up where people are supposed to, right before bed, kneel down and think about all the things they would like to have good things happen toward, that's a tremendous refinement of your own value structure over time, right? That's a really good cultural practice.
Yes. Yes. It would be something I'd like to do, is be more prayerful in every moment of my life. You know, to be able to kind of live each moment with some acknowledgement of that deep yearning going on in the background as I'm going through moment by moment by moment. Any thoughts about that?
I think more of that is good. I think probably every moment of life might be a little bit too much, because there may be other things that are just as important to focus on.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't want one note to dominate the whole thing, but I think we can definitely, when we think about it as a mode, right? When we think about the mode of what would happen to our whole body and heart and focus if we totally cared about something desperately, right? If we just heard our most beloved person was hanging on 50-50 in the hospital, and maybe they're going to die and maybe they're going to recover.
Mm-hmm.
Everything in us is aligned in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So how do you bring that alignment to the rest of your life? Well, it starts by thinking about it. Starts by thinking about what your parts are, right? What are the parts you would have to line up? You want your body and your emotions and your focus, at the very least, those three parts, to be going in the same direction as much as you can, to the point where it seems like too much, where it seems like it's more than you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Beautiful. All right.
I'm reeling now from the thought of my loved ones near death.
I know. I know. Mm-hmm. Sovereignty.
Sovereignty, a good game B concept.
Mm.
There's a lot of need to remember the importance of authentic, increased agency. But it can also get carried away, right? Ken Wilber's got this whole autonomy and communion have got to evolve together,
Mm-hmm.
right? We could say sovereignty and mutuality. We've got to have practices and technologies and communities that increase both of those things together, right? It's not enough to surrender yourself. You also have to be more of a self, right? You have to be able to be a better participant, player, navigator in the world. And you also have to be able to do that in communion and with other people better. And if you get only one of those things, you're going to run into some serious problems, or at the very least, you're not going to be as helpful to the evolution of civilization project as you might otherwise be.
Mm-hmm.
Where does sovereignty come from? Comes from valuing yourself, which is tough. It's easy to claim you value yourself. There's a beautiful phrase from Swami Rudrananda, who said, spiritual development is the outcome of your self-esteem, but most of us don't have any real self-esteem, so we get that by serving others. That's a nice way to put it. They're very interpenetrating. I think deepening your idiosyncratic or idiographic, that's Greg Henrique's word, experience of yourself, that's important too. If there's more of you, then it can have more sovereignty. Right? If you expand, if you deepen, if you are more mindful of yourself, if you have more experimentally acquired individuality and more of a clear differentiation between yourself and your persona, your play acting, your tendency to get lost in social performances and symbolic versions of reality, in just conformity rituals, if you can at least take those as opportunities for pondering and self-inquiry, then you start to build up more of a sense of self. There's other aspects to it, right? Heidegger would say you're not going to have that authenticity unless you confront death and whatever all death represents to you. There's different ways to go at it. But if you have more depth or more fullness or more factors inside yourself that are individual rather than just going along and doing what you assume one does, then there's more of a person to move around, more of a person to make decisions, more of an agent. And I think that's important for sovereignty. But there's another aspect to sovereignty, which is, I touched on it with the social, it's much about what you don't let in, right? A sovereign state doesn't allow another country to fly military craft over itself. It's got some kind of border protection. So where is our border protection relative to incoming information? Where is our border protection relative to memes? When we watch the news, do we just believe it, right? Do we just believe whatever our emotional reaction is? Do we just believe whatever our habit structure is? Do we just do what other people do? Do we assume that we even know what we're talking about? Right? Those are potential encroachments on whatever core is going to be doing the sovereignty. So it's important to increase your agency, whatever that takes. It's important to have more of yourself, but it's also important to be really careful about just what's an automatic response. You don't have any sovereignty if you're just a push button mechanism of some kind.
Yeah, the push button mechanism. And I think it's really interesting that, there is a growing recognition, but I think people haven't been really hip to the need for these types of sovereign boundaries over what we allow in, especially when it comes to information and news and, memes. Do you think that's why it's become a focusing, like, why is this a focus in the liminal web right now, the focus more on sovereignty?
I would guess it has at least two roots.
Yeah.
One root is that there's been a lot of spiritual and transformational movements over the course of the last century, which involved sacrifice, surrender, and submission, whether that was to Marxism, or whether that was to your commune, or whether that was to your guru, or whatever it was, there was a sense in which your ego was the problem. And the solution was to get over your ego with the group or with another state of consciousness, something like that, where you just surrender to participate in something. Those are important skills, but that demonization of the ego set up a situation in which it's very hard for individuals to get a better quality of ego. And we need people who are strong, autonomous, right, leader-like, able to innovate, able to explore themselves, able to provide real feedback to the others. So that sense that we lacked that in a lot of the change movements of the 20th century, I think that's being compensated for now. But another half of it is just the experience of the digital tools, right? It's a little bit different than having to go and get a phone call from the landline or receiving the newspaper in the morning. These things are on all the time. They're throwing information at us at light speed from distant places. They're in our pockets. They're in our homes, right? Things that have nothing to do with us come right at us, and we feel like we have to decide thumbs up or thumbs down. I better let them know my opinion about this situation, right? It's really overwhelming. There's an onslaught and an immediacy, we have to, and I think we all feel this now, push back against that somehow. Install some kind of minimal gap that gives us a little bit of freedom from the algorithms, from the advertising, from the random chatter of the internets, right? That's coming at us way more than it came at our ancestors. And so it's much more important for us to at least give ourselves a little bit of breathing room in front of that. And I think we're all suffering from that now. And our brains, when they're healthy, know we've got to do something to gain a little ground back there.
Very much so. Okay, next topic. I wonder if I should pick a few because I don't know if we're going to get through them all. Should I pick 3, 1, 2? I don't know.
Oh my God. How much time do we have? How long are we doing this?
I don't know. As long until you tell me to stop. Okay. Oh, these don't go together at all. Well, maybe they do. Okay. Sense making, gender, and public shame. I don't know. Pick 1, pick 3. What do you want to talk about? What's most interesting?
I think sense making is not the least interesting, but I think it's been covered thematically by some of the things we've already discussed.
Yeah.
Gender is interesting because I think there's a lot of useless discussions around this.
Yeah.
How easy would it be to have your driver's license just have your genetic, anatomical, and social gender designations on it, right? Fine. We don't have to all be the same.
Yeah.
We need to know, right? There, you might be unconscious and the doctor has to put something in your body and they have to know about your chromosomes, not about your genitals or your identity.
Yeah.
Sometimes we need to know about your genitals. Other times we need to know about your cultural identity. And these can all be different. They can just be a little symbol in the corner that handles that. There's no reason we have to go, it has to be one or it has to be the other. That's a really clumsy way to do it that kind of prevents us from bringing any nuance into the conversation. There's a whole bunch of arguments that go on that could be easily diffused simply by changing the representational metric and making it slightly more sophisticated.
Yeah.
Public shame intrigues me, though.
Hang on, just before we go there. I just want to know, what are your pronouns? What's your email signature got on it these days?
I like to be referred to as Your Majesty.
Okay. All right.
Or His Holiness.
Okay. Got it.
No, I'm pretty cis, straight. I know I'm privileged to not have to think about it very much.
Got it. Okay, good. Next, you were going to say public shame interests you because?
Yeah, it's very intriguing because, especially as a person who does a lot of recording and broadcasting now, and watching these communities of people circulate in public, and being concerned that certain communities, meta, liminal, integral, all that stuff, I want these communities to be more robust, more anti-fragile.
Yeah.
And I know that sometimes a tension with creating safe and curated spaces for people to be able to bring a lot of dimensions of themselves forward and try to create the ethos they want in different little niches. That's important. I want everybody to feel free to just throw people out of internet spaces. It's fine. It doesn't cost them anything, really. They can just talk somewhere else.
Yeah.
At the same time, we need to be willing to be humiliated, ashamed, to risk our reputation, to do things like this, partly for our personal growth so that we're not hemmed in by that anxiety, but also partly because there's no way out of this where you're clean, right? The idea that you can set up a beautiful, futuristic, white background, self-transformation website where a bunch of multiracial smiling people look like they just got down from a starship. And
I've seen this.
Yes.
I've seen these websites.
Been around for decades. It's not wholly bad, but it's fragile because it's so easy to throw a little bit of mud on that. It's not the same as getting ready for the attacks that are going to come. And I think anybody who's grown up with the internet to whatever degree understands you're going to get attacks. Anybody who's looked at the comments on a YouTube video understands that when the whole world is superficially exposed to every kind of content, a huge chunk of that feedback is just going to be useless noise and attacks. And we need to be able to survive and thrive in that world. Right? Everything you do has a high risk in the information universe of triggering a lot of people. That doesn't mean we don't have a responsibility and a conscience about trying to take people's opinions into account, trying to do our work better. But it does mean that we can't have this idea that avoiding shame is something that we can lean into. If anything, we've got to go the other way. We know how many leaders and public officials have turned out to be scumbags over the years, right? And part of that was maintained by their attempt to constantly put on a good face, to not let any upsetting feedback come at them, right? Our leaders don't want to be shamed. The Chinese government doesn't want to be shamed. And these are weaknesses, right? It creates a brittle system of top-down control that's always to some degree going to fail. You're not going to be able to keep up a positive, clean public image of you at all times. And it reveals your emotional fragility to even think that's a possibility. We've got to go the other way to gain a strength and a resilience that will face the really complicated information universe that's already here and still emerging. So, you know, expose yourself to shame and adapt to that. What skills do you need to handle that? Not what skills do you need to try to constantly avoid it at all times. That's a big distinction. I think it's important.
Very nice. I'm quite liking the take on shame and aggression today. Very nuanced, very juicy, Layman.
When I was a kid, there were situations where I didn't process shame or embarrassment or at all. Right. So that's a thing I've had to learn a little bit to lean into, to see its value.
Yeah, I get that. All right. Next. I don't know. I'll try 3 again. Oh, I don't know if this is good. Okay. What do we got here? We've got creativity, disorientation with a backslash between dis and orientation. I don't know what that means. And species-wide awakening.
All 3 of these seem not totally exciting to me.
Okay.
Species-wide awakening is, I think, a very trivial kind of fantasy in a lot of ways. I think there's lots of room for collective transpersonal consciousness and intelligence upgrade.
Yeah.
There's a lot of possibilities for improvements and refinements and positive depth evolution towards a better planetary wisdom civilization. But the idea that I hear from some people that we're right on the cusp of a big change to some kind of humanity awakening, I don't see it playing out that way. It seems way too easy. It doesn't seem to be anything like what any of the complex, gritty dimensions of reality are like in the world. It's a little bit too clean, too simple, too quick, too idealistic. But a lot of those pieces are in play, but we just got to be cautious about the kind of simplicity of that hope. It's like thinking Jesus is going to come back tomorrow and fix it all. Disorientation, I would file that under ambiguity, right? I think we have to get better at being disoriented. Anybody who does any kind of hypnosis or hypnotherapy knows that the orienting reflex is a function that humans and animals share in terms of putting us into a hypnotic trance state. Hypnotic trance states are not divestitures of agency. I think they might be a return to actually a more natural balance between the hemispheres. But it can certainly be hacked, right? Famously, TV commercials, they present you with a new reality every 20 seconds. You have to keep getting up to speed on it, reorienting yourself because you've been disoriented by the sudden shift. And a number of reorientations in a row will put an animal into a trance state where it's highly susceptible, which is great if you know what's happening, not so great if they're just trying to sell you shoes or something like that. So I think we need to get better at understanding the orienting reflex in ourselves. I think we need to push ourselves regularly as part of our ongoing practice into slightly disoriented states and watch ourselves go in and come back so that we have some kind of robustness against systems that are going to try to hack that process in us.
Great. Who would have come up with an answer that interesting? Come on! This is amazing. What are we doing here? All right. Okay, next. I picked 3 again. Shoot. Oh, well, 2 of them fit together. Maybe they all do. Actually, these I could fit these together. So I'm curious to see what you will do. Embodiment, time, and trauma.
They could go together, but I think putting them together might obscure what's most interesting about each one of them.
Hey, great.
Time is very slippery, and I don't just mean in general. I think the principle that if you try to find the present moment, you always just missed it.
Yes.
I don't think, in a Hegelian sense, I don't think that failure is a failure to find a positive thing. I think that failure is constitutive of what the positive thing is, right? I think it would behoove us to think of a moment as a structure that slips past itself, and to think of all of time as having that basic shape. This is a metaphysics of adjacency view of what time is like. This is the not quiteness of what nextness is, right? Time is, in a sense, next. It's always slipping past something.
Mhm.
So you never really get it. It's not chunked. And even if you say we've got all the future and all the past in some Einsteinian block universe, if you look closely at that, each bit of it is going to slip off the edge. It's going to whittle away, right? We have retrocausality. Oh, well, the future's not quite the future. The past isn't quite the past either, because all we have are recollections of it. The present's not quite the present.
Mhm.
So even the directionality of time might not quite be the directionality of time. So I think it's important, at least for me, to start to conjecture what time looks like, how to relate to time, if we take away the discreteness, the unity of its qualities. The future isn't really the future, the past isn't really the past, the present isn't really the present. And none of those mean we stop thinking about it. They mean that we conceive of these things as being the not quiteness of themselves.
Okay.
There's one other thing about time I think is interesting. It doesn't really
Okay.
pertain to this, but I was always fascinated by it, because when I was a kid, I was obsessed with getting into hyperspaces where I would exist across eternity.
Mm-hmm.
And I had experiences like this. And now I think, yeah, that's probably not exactly what happened there. I might have just bypassed my brain's clocking mechanism or something like that. Seemed like eternity, but for 10 minutes. How does that work?
Okay.
But one of the things I want to say is there are ways to think about time and eternity within a single concept, right? So if you imagine a person riding on a wave, as long as you're moving with the wave, you and the wave are not moving relative to each other.
Right.
If time has a rhythm, time has a flow or something like that, if you are moving along with time, clocking it cognitively at the same rate as the time flow, your experience will be of time not moving relative to you. You and time are changing the same. And the subjective, obvious experience of that would be, oh, time isn't changing relative to me. This is an experience of eternity. So there are some interesting ways to think that bypass some of the basic logical opposites that are usually at play in conversations around time.
Interesting.
Embodiment is huge. I think.
Hang on.
Okay.
Time out. Okay. All right. Okay. So like, what do you mean? So I don't know if this is what you're talking about. I just want to say this and see if this is what you mean. Something I've been fascinated with. Okay, so if you're a panpsychist, right, then you could imagine that this photon has a perspective, and we're watching the photon. Well, not exactly, but we're kind of watching the photons come to the sun from us, and it takes 8 minutes for us to see that. But from the perspective of the photon, zero time. Zero time to get to us. So that just blows my mind.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know exactly, but let's do the thought experiment. Pretend we're on that photon. Zero experience of time for that photon, or virtually zero, right? Who knows? If it's an infinitesimal, it never really gets to zero. That's how the metaphysics of adjacency would read it. But almost no time is experienced by the photon. I would go for that.
You'd go for.
But what does that mean? Does that mean that the thing we call time stops and that photon is existing in all places and all times at the same time, like God, and it could make changes in the 1490s? That seems a little bit excessive. And so what I would say is a more cautious hypothesis is that the photon is moving with the background speed of the rate of change of the information processing of the universe. It's going at the speed of everything else. It's not going. It's not in zero time. It's going in the general shared time of all processes. Relative to all processes, it's not doing any distinct additional timing process. It's doing the same timing process that all the processes share, but they're continuing to unfold through something like time.
All right.
But still, man, that would be awesome.
All right. I just wanted to hear what you had to say. Okay. Wow. I need to get I need to see if there's a joint around here or something to keep this conversation going. All right. So next, the next question about time was you said something about we have to treat the past, present, and the future as like not quite, there's a not quiteness about them. What does that mean? Well, it's not exactly the question I wanted to ask. You said something like, and let me just see if I got this correctly, but you said something like, if we can go through life with an appreciation for the not quiteness of the past, present, and future, it'll disclose something, it'll make something available to us. I'm not sure what you said, but it was very interesting to me, and I wanted to double click on that a little bit.
I think there's two ways to go with that.
Yeah.
One would be, what's the math, what's the physics? If we changed our notion of units to not quite units, or if we treated everything as an infinitesimal, or put everything on a gradient, rather took 100% and 0% off every one of our calculations, then does our computation of time look any different? Could you build a system up like that? That would be worth looking into. But the other part is the individual experience of moments part.
Yeah.
And in that sense, what increases your odds of being in good timing with things? Is it to think of moments and the future and the past? Or is it to experience those as a little bit permeable, a little bit inherently incomplete? Not something you miss, but something that has the shape of you missed it, that it's a move, it's like a swoop or something like that. You get a sense of what its movements are, so that you can move with it. Right? If you were gonna, it's easier to figure out how to do an interesting dance with a person than with a statue, right? Because a person is never going to be where they were a second ago. They're constantly being offset. And so if we view time as constantly offset in our embodiment of time, embodiment, then we might be able to be more fluid with it. We might be better dancers with it. And that might lead us to experiences that are more like eternity, because we're going along with it better, and in a way that would become always a little bit problematic if we try to think of these chunk-like units of self-contained, self-consistent time.
Got it. I love it. Okay, embodiment.
Super important. I mean, I love the fact that a lot of leading edge cognitive scientists, placing embodied cognition at the forefront, because there are a lot of mechanisms in the whole organism that contribute to our thinking and experience and perceptions, not just what's in the front part of the skull. Embodiment as a practice, as a sense of ongoing interoceptive and proprioceptive awareness of what my insides and my organs and my response systems are doing, and what it's like to be the inside of me, not just the outside of me. That's super important, right? To somatic embodiment, really important, especially with things like invasive, addictive digital systems. If you can remember the experience of the inside of your physiology, that puts you in a much better position not to get immediately hacked by all kinds of social and digital and commercial functions. You have a little bit of space and more of a rich sense of what you are. And obviously our social systems, our medical systems have been, our economic systems, insufficiently appreciative of what the full richness and dimensionality of the body is. So I think we need to really understand and put the body at the center of the mandala, let's say. That's where cognition takes place. That's where health is afforded to us. That's the aspect that often gets left out of our thinking and makes our thinking become sort of flat and stuck at the cultural surface. There's just so many areas in which we have to take the multidimensional well-being of the body more seriously, both as an objective fact and also as a subjectively inhabitable space.
Great. Trauma? Anything about that?
Trauma is fascinating, right? Trying to generalize the concept of trauma intrigues me, right? You go, well, it's kind of too much or too soon, right? Because there's a lot of things that are traumatic that might not be traumatic under other circumstances, right? We obviously know that in fairly simple, highly charged moral affairs like child sexual abuse, right? If somebody's having sex with a 4-year-old, we don't ask whether the 4-year-old was into it. That's not a pertinent question. Yeah. It's too soon. It's not even an option for them to be into it. It's overwhelming. Likewise, I can have a glass of water, but could I have 1,000 gallons of water? No, that's going to kill me. It's too much. It's out of the range of acceptable possibilities for the structure, the developmental being at that point. So that's really important for us to understand, because once we get a generalized notion of what trauma is, we can branch out and start looking at it in more areas of life, right? And we don't want to get locked down in some hysterical accusation that everything might be traumatic, but it is a more pervasive phenomenon than we usually give it credit for, right? We're quite happy to say, yeah, somebody got kicked in the head when they were a kid, or a soldier had a bomb go off next to him, trauma. But we don't really think about things like, you taught me about religion before I was ready, and now my response to religion is a little bit locked down and reactive and fundamentalist and has a secret evil inside it, right? You might think you're being helpful to a child by providing them this education early, but if it's too soon, even a good thing can be a trauma. Or someone's trying to express their emotions to you. Great. But if it goes on too long, or there's too much of it and you can't handle it, now it's a problem. So we need to be able to, I think, generalize the notion of trauma to see it in a lot more areas of life so we can take it more seriously, part of which is being able to say to each other, hey, that's too much or too soon for me. I'm full right now. I'm not against what you're saying, but I can't handle any more of it right now. Like, that's a really important skill to be able to do. It took me a long time to be able to say anything like that in an intimate relationship. There's another element of trauma, which is really intriguing, goes to the egregore thing, right? To what degree do we think of the trauma as having a momentum of its own? We have this way of thinking about genes, where you think, oh, a gene is a pattern of information. It wants to replicate itself. It actually doesn't care about the organism. All it needs is for you to reproduce. It could actually be bent on destroying you. As long as it doesn't destroy you before you've reproduced, it's totally fine, and it'll keep moving into the future. To what degree is that true about trauma? Right? When we say hurt people, we're talking about a weird kind of propagation of trauma that might act in a similar way to genetic and mimetic perpetuations. And certainly when you look around the world, you see a lot of phenomenon that would make you suspicious that trauma propagation is almost a motive of systems, right? If you say, hey, we're going to go and stop terrorism, but all we're really going to do is upset a lot of families and then put them back in the mix. Or in Canada, we've had this thing with the residential schools, where Protestant and Catholic schools, we're going to break these kids from their culture and install them in the new culture. Now, you can think whatever you want about that calculation, but they didn't do it. They took these kids, abused them, humiliated them, and then released them back. Not transformed into part of the new culture at all, just hurt and returned. We see that on the American border. You pick up people, you don't kill them, you don't let them in, you just mess with them and let them go. It's like the trauma is trying to propagate itself back. And when you look at systems and you wonder sometimes, are they inherently corrupt? Are there a few people doing a few bad things, or is there actually a shadow side to the way systems function, which is trying to extend trauma? Does trauma want to replicate? That's a really important question to stand in front of, I think.
Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah, very interesting. You want to keep going a bit? You just let me know.
Yeah. Well, hey, I'm good. What else you got in that hat?
All right. I've got education and language.
Education and language. Education is huge. Education is the choke point and or leverage point of all the other problems. If we could fix our education system, we could perhaps address our problems. If we can't fix our education system, probably nothing else is really going to help.
Good luck. Yeah.
And so that's becomes a really open question. How are we miseducating people, and for what? Right? You might say, well, the education system was always a factory to produce people to fit into a certain kind of economic mode of production. Okay. So we're anticipating a world in which it's going to work out, that we're designing education to produce people for something. What is that something now? What does the mid to late 21st century look like that we could prepare people for it? That's a very difficult question to answer.
Yeah.
Any one of dozens of radical destabilizations are highly likely to occur over that period, and probably in conjunction with other radical destabilizations. So now you would have to educate people for the functional niche of changing ecosystems, civilization collapse, dealing with non-human intelligences of some kind, radical transformations of what it means to have a gene system and to reproduce human beings, wholly different information landscapes. There's all these kinds of strange things that mean the skill sets that are considered to be basic would have to change.
Definitely.
Right? If it's 2050, do you need reading, writing, and arithmetic? Or what do you need? You need fast adaptation skills? Do you need embodiment skills? Do you need to be able to access right brain impressions more than left brain impressions? Or when to alternate back and forth between them? When do you use unconscious skills? So these are like considerations about what we would consider to be core curriculum. Right? And it's obvious to everybody who's looked at it pretty much that what we consider socially to be the general basic skills we want to teach people are not really the skills that human beings need in order to flourish in general.
Sure.
Yeah, right. Most schools don't have meditation and contemplation. Most phys ed doesn't teach you much about your phys at all.
Yeah.
Right. I always say 12 years of physical education. They didn't even tell me where my pancreas was. Physical education is that we ran in a circle, played volleyball once in a while. Where's the education part?
Sure.
Where was the education on pleasure? Where was the education on conversation? Where was the education on attention training, right? Some places, some teachers bring some of this in, but the core skills we need to adapt to an uncertain environment and have a flourishing multidimensional life and civilization, we're not really training those. We're training something else, and it's getting dangerous.
It's getting dangerous.
Getting dangerous. You might have been able to get away with it in 1950. The stakes weren't as high. The nearness of destabilizations wasn't so present, right? But now we're looking at a situation where we need a lot of people to rapidly figure out whole new technological and economic and political approaches, right? Whole new kinds of social mobilization, massive engagement with the ecosystem in order to figure out how to make it be something we can live in and not something that's going to destroy us. We need a lot of people to do this fast, and we need those people to be smart and engaged and embodied and non-pathological and up to date. This is a high demand. And if we don't start, we're not going to get better at it. And it's urgent.
For a problem like that, I mean, the sort of immediate conclusion that one might reach just looking at the scope of what's needed and the time scale is, oh, we're beyond hope. It's too late. Is there any, are there any secrets you know of? Any ways to expedite this whole process?
Well, I want to tie those things together because I mean, there are ways to begin to approach it. At the same time, it's an open inquiry, right? The integral stage has made it a focus for this year's interviews. So to me, I'm trying to learn how we should all be learning. But there's something about that sense of doom that I think we need to take on board, right? What I don't want to do is jump quickly from, okay, well, if that's the case, then I guess we're fucked unless we rapidly do some new thing, right? It is urgent, but we can't make that jump too rapidly. I think we need to really accept the doom. That doesn't mean it's a fact. Doesn't mean there's nothing we can do about it, but I think we need to make ourselves emotionally vulnerable to the possibility of the dead end, of the doom, of the failure, to really let that die in us so we can start to be present to try the new things. Because what we don't want to do is port the old problems into the new attempts because we didn't go through the necessary grieving and emotional processing first.
Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah, and I'm curious about how you know, in the face of all that and having experienced that to some degree, how, and then the question, one of the questions for me is like, okay, how could I, if I was just starting with myself, how could I re-educate myself in this moment? It seems like at least I could start there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a couple of places to start is, like I just said, make a list of what you would consider to be the core curriculum for a human life.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And when we look back at, before there was institutional state school systems, the people who really got an education, even just a guy like Benjamin Franklin, let alone Pico de Mirandela or some great classical thinkers, they had to take a lot of responsibility for that. They had to put that question to themselves. What am I going to focus on?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to build virtues in what areas?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's an ongoing inquiry that we should be more engaged in. And if more of us were more intentionally engaged in it, we would come up with more insights collectively about how to instantiate that for each other better. So that's one part of it. Also, obviously, zone of proximal learning, flow states, growth mindset, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You want to be pushing into things where you're not sure if you can do it well. Right? That's a beautiful insight in Carol Dweck's growth mindset book is, sure, self-esteem has been a problem, but you can't get self-esteem by just telling kids they're great any more than you can help them out by telling them they're a piece of shit because they're not doing what the school wants them to do. None of those things are really important. What's really important is getting people to actually try to do things that they aren't very good at. And that's going to give them self-esteem and humility simultaneously and continue their ongoing internal growth. Right? So things that are a little bit of an overload. It's a little bit like exposure-based therapy is like that, right? That's really a learning process in which you say, well, I can go one step toward a spider. That's what I can do. I can go that far. At least I'm not pulling back from it because I'm not trying to privilege my comfort. I'm trying to privilege enough discomfort to provoke my system to try to learn a new thing and gain a new skill and competency, to reorganize itself robustly relative to something. So whenever you have the chance to try to do something that's going to make you feel stupid because you aren't very good at it, take that opportunity.
Take the opportunity.
Right? Can I try? Those are the 4 best words in English. Right? Let me have a go at the lawnmower or the new app or whatever it is. I'm going to fail. Yeah. I'm not going to be better for having failed.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Okay, here it is. Imagination, truth, sex.
I love the distinction that my pal Vervaeke tries to make between imaginary and imaginal. I think that's probably the most important thing about imagination, really, is getting a distinction between how imagination can operate as an alternative to the patterns of the world. It's just imaginary. Versus how imagination can open you up to more patterns of the world than you might normally experience. And that's imaginal. Right? So there are ways, and we should be asking ourselves this, how do we use our imagination to teach us more about what exists rather than sequestering it in a place that doesn't really teach us anything or ignoring it as if it can't teach us anything and that only reason and facts, which are highly skewed, could teach us something. So trying to make the imaginal more a part of our ongoing ritual and educational and social experience of reality. What were the other ones?
just truth and sex.
Truth is contentious.
Sure is. It sure is.
I have 2 things that have interested me right away on truth. One is it's about a degree of fidelity between something and something else. And those could be different kinds of things. It could be like Stephen Colbert used to talk about truthiness versus truth. Similar processes, right? Am I being faithful to the objective structural fact? Am I trying to approximate that better? Or am I being faithful to my immediate, dubious, intuitive instinct? Similar processes, that process of approximate matching, which is probably never going to be 0 and never going to be 100, but you can get a lot closer, right? That's what the scientific method tried to give us. Methods for getting a lot closer in our approximation so that we can be more faithful to what is. Now, Nietzsche had a really interesting idea about truth that I love. because we normally think of truth as being the underlayer, which is or is not overlayered, wallpapered by some kind of deception or ignorance. He thought about it the other way, typically, right? He said, look, truth is a coin and the faces of the coin have worn off, and now it's valuable just as gold. That truth is downstream. It's a failed lie. So if you were to imagine animals gaining the power to speak, why would these animals have any incentive to make accurate statements? A cat doesn't care what's accurate about the world. It cares that it gets some milk, let's say, right? Every animal, in his view, would instinctively use symbolic communication just out of their incentive structure. It would mean nothing to them to ask what's true. True is whatever is going to help them get what they want. But over time, in one subset of the animals, this tendency to confabulate based on our incentives gets in its own way, locks itself in place, right? Two different lies that are incommensurable start to, can't do anything, it's locked in, nowhere to move. Oh, truth, right? Some kind of new, rare, weird human intellectual philosophical move goes on. Most people don't do it. Most animals probably wouldn't do it. A very small, very recent percentage of the organisms are interested in this place where two potential falsehoods won't let each other move. And you get this very high intensity of approximation fidelity between them. And you go, oh, that has a new degree of power and reliability. I like that. Let's start to discuss where these truths go, right? Is it mathematics or geometry, or it is what it is, or it's something where you go, wow, that's really almost a perfect approximation. There's so much power there. It opens up new potentials for the species, but it's not the original condition disguised by the lies. The lie was the original condition, and the truth is the breakdown of the lies. Not a bad thing, because that breakdown affords us new possibilities. But like everything else with Nietzsche, the inversions in his thinking offer us a certain freshness and a new way to go at things that opens up horizons for us.
And how, I mean, that's interesting. How would you see that playing out in the situation that we're in right now in the world?
Which situation are you thinking of that we're
well,
now?
Specifically, what I'm talking about is the kind of failure of our truth making and truth seeking institutions.
Yeah, we're going to have to have whole new approaches to finding where there's high fidelity approximations. And a lot of that's going to start out with critique. For example, is it possible for short bursts of headline news to inform you more than it deludes you? That's an open question, right? We might say that if someone just gives us a burst or a tweet or a headline or a 2-minute blurb, that's always going to be deluding, right? Which is maybe one of the reasons that people are opening more to the podcast form, to this Joe Rogan thing. Just give me 3 hours of unfocused meandering with an expert or a pseudo expert or somebody, so I can crawl around in the nuances of that experience and look for little areas where there might be fragments. I know I'm not going to find a 10-pound gold bar, but there might be flecks of gold in all this clay. Sure. That's going to take some time to sift out. I'm not going to get that time in a newspaper article. I'm not going to get that time in a link. I'm going to have to explore through it and sift it. But I think that's an example of starting to adapt our truth-oriented mechanisms to the environment in which truth is extremely dubious and every incoming signal is truly and seen to be distorted in some way.
All right, that leaves sex.
Blockchain is another approach, right? You set up new systems where the idea of the system is to make a transparent history of the changes within that system. Because you go, well, I can't believe anything that's coming at me like this. I would have to believe something that shows me a lockdown of the history of the changes where each of those steps has a high degree of confirmed fidelity to the next or the previous step. Mm-hmm. And so those are both examples of, I think, cultural trends we're starting to see as people branch out looking for new ways to find high fidelity approximations.
Yeah, that's great. Sex. It's the last. I mean, there's two more in here, which we don't have to talk about because who wants to talk about hyperobjects and ontological doubleness? But
maybe we can weave that into sex somehow.
All right.
Is sex a hyperobject? I mean, it's distributed all over, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, what a fascinating topic, and obviously classically so mysteriously alien to the discourse of higher spirituality and philosophical development, when it was so essential to all the organisms and to human emotional and cultural and intellectual experience. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's an area in which we all need to get better, and getting better means like mapping the richness of this terrain in really new ways. Mm-hmm. How do you map that richness? You got to be open to all kinds of different perspectives. You got to try to be true to whatever your actual impulses are. And very importantly, you got to spend a little more time at thresholds, right? I think a lot of the problem in terms of not developing sexual intelligence is that we hold back or we leap. We don't experience that liminal in-between zone, right? If you talk to it, as I've done on the integral stage, lots of different sexual alchemists and neo-tantric practitioners and these kind of things, among their repeated pieces of advice is to slow down. And what that really means is not that you shouldn't go fast sometimes. What it means is you're going to miss little things if you jump too quickly, if you don't hang out at all in the transition zones, if you're not attentionally and emotionally interested in, you know, when you get this close, oh, that's like, then you get this close. Okay. Right? Those are all informative moments. Things happen at those adjacency thresholds.
Yes.
And we can learn a lot viscerally. We could get a lot smarter by examining those. Mm-hmm. Now, there's another aspect of sex, which is really intriguing, feeds into the what's so strange about our current moment, which is that it's already, but it's still becoming decoupled from reproduction. We all know that there was a sexual revolution, but we have these technologies such as much more adequate birth control than our ancestors had, and the ability to basically generate new human beings in laboratory-like conditions, which indicate that reproduction is taken out of the human sexual process. Now, for a lot of people, they're still very close together, but in principle, they are now decoupled. And that is of world historical impact, because the processes we've been running on this planet for 10 billion years have been processes of genetic evolution through reproduction. Mm-hmm. That's what we've been doing. And if you can decouple reproduction from sexuality, it's now standing outside of that process, or that process is now going to happen outside of sexuality, right? That's all very strange. We don't know how that's going to look. And I think we really significantly don't appreciate how big a rupture that is with not only the history of human society, but the history of organisms, essentially. It's been going one way for such a long time, and we just separated them. And it'll take quite a while for us to know what that's going to mean. But we should. It's another one of those great koans we should be standing in front of, because this is going to get weird. Sex means something differently than it has meant on the earth thus far. Mm-hmm. And it may be that is a technologization is going to occur. Maybe it's going to be a trivialization. Maybe it's going to be a turn to something like tantra and sexual magic, or some kind of, meaning generating, collaboratively constructed routine. So we don't know how that's going to look, but there are very interesting reasons to want to lean toward the sacred sexuality and intentionality and refinement and use of exploration of kind of model, rather than get trapped in either a failed regressive attempt to recouple sex and reproduction, or some kind of weird you're just all going to have sex robots and harvested kind of world, right? All these things are possible. One of them is much more interesting than the other. There is in my view, a better way for sex and reproduction to be quasi-decoupled. People should still be trying to have families as best they can and when they want to and for whatever we need as a society. But this decoupling is real and it has a future. And there are ways to do it that are going to be problematic or ways to do it that could be part of our emerging wisdom civilization and a way to make our lives healthier and smarter and better and more vibrant.
Oh, great. Cool. Anything you want to say to tie it all together?
I want to say I think the hat did a great job.
Good. Yeah, good. So did you.
Yeah, those are what a rich constellation of topics that you put in the mix for us. Thank you. I guess what I hope is that I'm at least templating the idea that you can have fun and think more deeply and feel more openly on all of these topics.
Yeah, felt like that. Cool. All right, thank you, my friend. I really appreciate it.
Also, I love God. He'll be mad if I don't mention that. Shut up.
We forgot. I don't think we did.
Yeah, throw that in your mix for next time.
Okay, sounds
good. What a pleasure. Thanks, Justin. This has been a lot of fun, and it's always very heartwarming to be with you.
Yeah, same here. Love you. Okay, take care, man.
Cheers.
Have a good day. Bye.